Let's talk about. So verbs in special cases. What we've worked with already are like subject verb agreements. So you have to have a plural verb with a plural subject, singular verb with a singular subject, and sometimes those sound funny if they don't match up, if they're incorrect. Problem though is there's certain special cases, and there's situations where it might actually sound awkward, but it is correct. Things that we want to look at and make sure that we're using the right form of the verb with the subject. So all this today is about those special cases. Here we go. This lesson seemed to take a little longer the last few days.
Hi, welcome to the lesson for common verb errors when the subject is a group, an organization, or a title.
Okay, and that's where we often run into an issue. Organizations, titles, things like that, where you may instinctively want to use a plural or a singular verb. You might be, headed down the wrong road because it's going to sound right the other way, but grammatically correct is going to be different. So that instinct doesn't always work with us.
Verbs are probably the most complicated part of language. They have so many different forms. That means there are a bunch of cases when you might make an error. I'm going to talk to you about a word, an organization, or a title. Let me ask you this question. Is a group one thing or a lot of individuals? So is it as absurd as there? A group is one thing in a sense. After all, you call it a group, and you can have more than one group. But it's also made up of a bunch of why there's confusion about whether groups are singular or plural and what verb to use. I remember when Roberto started playing t-ball, his team was the Robins, and I had to send an email out to all the parents about practice. I started writing it, but would see, is the Robins singular because it's one team? Is it plural because it sounds like a plural? Now I'm much more confident that I won't make a mistake. Here, I'll show you what I know.
Let's take a look here.
Let's talk about groups first. Really, most of the nouns I'm going to talk about are called collective nouns. That's a singular noun that describes a group, like family, couple, class, swarm, pack, government, troop, or audience. I bet you can think of a lot of words that describe groups of people or animals. In fact, groups of animals often have funny names, like a gaggle of geese, a charm of hummingbirds, or a pride of lions. And even the word group is a collective noun. So are these words singular or plural? That will tell you what kind of verb to use. Most of the time, collective nouns are singular. The class is going on a field trip. A school of fish swims in a pond. But be careful, because if you're describing different members of a group all doing different things as individuals, you're supposed to use a plural verb. I've discovered that some people disagree whether it's okay to use a plural verb with a collective noun. And the best solution is to rewrite the sentence if the group isn't really acting as a group. Look at this sentence. The class is working on its individual assignments. Well, that sounds strange, right? Saying its individual assignments doesn't sound right because each person is working on an assignment. Let's try it as a plural. The class are working on their individual assignments. That sounds better because each person is working on their own assignment. But now the class are sounds awkward. The best solution is to change from a collective noun to a plural noun that really describes what you mean, like this. The students are working on their individual assignments. Of course, there are always exceptions, aren't there? Some collective nouns are treated as plural, like police and people. You'd say the police have a suspect, not the police has a suspect. Do you think you've got the hang of subjects that describe groups?
So her main point here is talking about collective nouns, right? So the team, which we've talked about. So the group, the team, well, even like the police, something like that. So while it's made up of individuals, right? There's individuals on that team. As a collective noun, we use singular verbs, we think of that as a singular, right? It's one entity. They do things all together. The team is going to the championship, right? Is being a singular noun or singular verb. And most of the time that works, right? Team, group, things like that. There are certain times that it does sound awkward. You were going to use something else. And then you
See if you can use the right verb with a collective noun. Which choice is the best way to word this sentence?
This one's fairly straightforward. So we're talking about a couple, which is two people, right? But if we're talking about them as a collective, right, they are doing things together as one. So as a collective noun, we use typically singular verbs. So the correct answer here is the couple is going to honeymoon in Paris, right? The couple singular is singular verb going to honeymoon in Paris. And she also mentioned something as well. So if it sounds awkward and you can't quite wrap your head around the subject verb agreement, try different syntax, try using different words, and that might make it easier for you. But in this case, the couple is going to honeymoon.
Great job! The word couple is a collective noun, so it should have a singular verb. The correct sentence is, the couple is going to honeymoon in Paris.
Okay.
Some other nouns describe one thing but sound plural, like news, civics, mathematics, physics, economics, measles, or mumps. You should always use a singular verb with these subjects, like this. The news is on after the game. Mathematics is an interesting field. The measles is a miserable disease. Did you notice that some of these words are usually used with the, like the news or the measles? That's a clue that it's singular. A few others can be grouped into fields of study, like mathematics or physics or economics. A field of study is singular.
Point being, just because that noun ends in S, it may still be singular. So you have to make sure of its usage.
Words seem to describe one thing, but they're treated as plural because they have two parts or two halves. That includes things like scissors, pants, and shorts. You'd say, my new scissors are very sharp. These old pants have holes in them. One special case is the word dollars and other terms for money like pounds or euros. Usually when you talk about an amount of money, it's singular, like this. $10 is a lot of money for parking. But when you're not talking about a price or an amount of money, then dollars is plural, so you'd say, US dollars are used as currency in many countries. So, do you think you can tell when nouns that sound plural are really singular?
Yeah, and again, those are really special occasions. Here's a great example of where you could change that. It's like US dollars are used as currency in many countries. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I don't know if that's right, and you're not going to sit there and look up, your subject verb agreement in a style manual. You could say US currency is used as currency in many countries, or change the syntax there. So US money is used, something like that, to avoid, just out and out avoid it. But we are still going to have to learn about those.
Type the correct present tense form of to be in the sentence.
Right. So we talked about subjects, particularly like school subjects. So physics is a school subject, which is going to be singular. So we use a singular, right? So when we talk about to be verbs, are going to be the singular and plural. So is will be our correct answer, right? Physics is now my new major. And you can see that's one reason we use those difference in subject and verb plurals, right? Why a plural verb doesn't have an S, but a singular one does. So you avoid having a situation where you have those two S sounds together. That's sort of the idea behind it. Physics is now my new major, which doesn't quite sound right in your head.
The last thing I want to talk about is names of organizations and titles of books, movies, or shows. Remember Roberta's TV team, the Robins? Well, sports teams are a special case, are treated as plural. The Robins are playing on Tuesday. That's the exception, though. Plural-sounding names like Stater Brothers, the New York Times, General Motors, and The Simpsons are singular. It's because they describe one thing, one company, one team, one book, or one show. Here's an example with a company name. General Motors makes two electric cars, the Chevy Bolt and the Chevy Volt. You wouldn't say General Motors make electric cars, even though motors sounds plural, and you'd say motors make loud noises. Companies and organizations can be a little tricky because they are a kind of collective noun. They describe groups of people. The names of shows, books, or movies can also sound plural, but they're singular because they only describe one thing, one show, one book, or one movie. So I'd say The Simpsons is on every Sunday. The important thing is to identify whether you're talking about one book or one company, or whether you're talking about a normal plural noun. Just remember, in the US, sports teams are an exception.
Yeah, and you think about that. So we tend to think of the members of those teams as individuals, part of it. So LeBron James is a Los Angeles Laker, right? So if we talk about the Lakers as a team, we talk about that plural. If we just say generically the team, that's going to be singular. But in the case of specific teams, which most of the ones in the, I can't think of one offhand that uses a singular. Well, I get the Columbus Crew, right? That would be singular. They don't use a plural. The Columbus Blue Jackets, however, do. So yeah, like Ben Roethlisberger was a Steeler. We would eliminate that plural there if we're talking about that individual, and then as a team, if we're using that specific name, it's going to be a plural verb. Specific cases, right? That's what we're talking about today. I feel like with movie titles and TV show titles, we feel a little more familiar. For some reason, it seems more natural. If I say Star Wars is my favorite movie, right? The Simpsons is my favorite TV show. We're a little more used to that, and it sounds natural. But yeah, so titles still treated as singular. Company names going to be treated as singular, even if they have what would typically be a plural in it. Good example was General Motors, right? General Motors, car manufacturer, right? General Motors is making cars, right? We're going to use that singular because Ford is also a car company, right? Ford is making cars. Toyota is making cars, right? Even though General Motors has that plural at the end, still treat as singular. So it's just about thinking, taking a second. It's like, is that an individual? Is it or is it a collective noun? Or is it, some type of plural where it's a bunch of different people? So the rules there change depending on the situation.
What change would you make to this sentence?
So, and another thing, right, is sometimes you might want to change the syntax, like I said, to kind of switch up the sentence. But here, what we have, the Centers for Disease Control are the government agency that fights epidemics. So Centers for Disease Control is going to be considered a singular, right? Even though that there's multiple people, multiple locations, we consider that one organization. So we change that R, which is going to be a plural verb.
Yes.
Yeah, so it'll read the Centers for Disease Control is the government agency that fights epidemics.
Great job! Even though the word centers is plural, the organization name Centers for Disease Control is singular. It describes one organization. The correct sentence is, the Centers for Disease Control is the government agency that fights epidemics.
There we go. Okay, and that's going to be the end of the lesson. So let's work on.
Very good work on those exercises.
Yeah, so we'll just flip on over here to the questions. You guys work on it on your own for about 10 minutes. They're all fairly short, and then we'll go over the lesson here at about 1:55. Let me pause. So our first one here, choice is the best way to word the sentence, and they give us 4 examples here. And what we're going for, one other thing you could typically use, a rule of thumb, is keeping it simple. So look for the more simple answer. And we have two that are closely related. They're basically using the two different verb choices. Both in all four cases, they use the two different examples, but the winners are each wearing their own medal is the correct answer. Excuse me. That came up quick. Ooh, there's another one. Okay. So winners are plural, right? More than one winner. They are not an entity on its own. The information they have in the other one, the group of award winners, complicates things because it's adding a collective noun and then also giving you a plural noun. So you eliminate that confusion and you just say the winners, and you're going to use the plural verb with it. Yeah, it talks about each winner's their own medal, and it's incorrect to refer to the group as singular. So you're kind of confusing things there. Now type the correct present tense form of to be, right? Talked about to be verbs. My favorite TV series is The Good Place, right? Now, just like if it was my favorite TV series is The Simpsons, we would still use that singular verb. And The Good Place is a really good show too. It's hilarious. That's right. So TV series refers to a television show. We just think of that as, media, books, magazines, anything like that as singular when it has a title. Again, so here, keeping it simple, Starbucks, although plural in its name, is a singular entity. So it receives the singular noun, and we just say Starbucks is ranked 132nd on the US Fortune 500. Now they're going to say to eliminate the coffee house chain. Now, of course, that would be singular as well. If I wasn't talking about Starbucks, I was talking about something more generic. The coffee house chain is ranked. And there's one other thing I want to mention here, but I want to show you their hint. So Starbucks is the name of a coffee house chain, so it's singular. It needs a singular verb. It's redundant and unnecessary to add the coffee house chain to the subject of the sentence. Now, Starbucks, most of us, probably every American, everybody lives here knows what a Starbucks is, who Starbucks is, all of that. There are some times that might not be necessarily repetitive, right? You might want to give some description, added to your subject. So that is grammatically correct. The coffee house chain Starbucks is, and it's not going to change the subject verb agreement. You're going to still use that singular verb, but in some cases, you may want to add a little more description to what you're talking about if people are less familiar with it, right? If you're not as familiar with the company, that would be just fine to say it's, a this or that. But in this case, it is repetitive. So everybody knows who Starbucks is. The fast food chain McDonald's, we don't need to say that. Everybody knows what McDonald's is.
Excellent. You got the first 3 questions all correct.
Okay.
That shows me that.
So the Seventh Fleet, right? Same thing. That's singular. The Seventh Fleet, probably thousands of personnel in the Navy. And like it says, it has aircraft carriers, destroyers, and aircraft. But when we think about the Seventh Fleet, it acts as one entity. The Seventh Fleet is in the Mediterranean or wherever it is right now, in the Pacific or in the Atlantic. But it moves together. It's one unit. So the Seventh Fleet is going to have a singular verb. The Seventh Fleet has carriers, destroyers, and aircraft. And eliminating repetitiveness and unnecessary phrases and clauses. That, those last two there. Some fleets, like the Seventh Fleet, has carriers, destroyers, and aircraft. Way too much going on there. We just want to know, what does the Seventh Fleet have? Carriers, destroyers, and aircraft. Same thing going on with that last one too, and the subject-verb agreement is wrong there. So the Seventh Fleet has carriers, destroyers, and aircraft. Yeah, singular verb. It's one entity, collective noun. So to have, right? So has or have, depending on plural or singular. These dressmaking scissors have a long pair of blades. Crazy, right? But the thing you want to think about that, right? So in this case, we use the plural because nouns like scissors, we don't, and the way to think about it, same thing with pants. How do we often refer to them? A pair of scissors, a pair of pants. So it's going to be plural, right? I guess if you just have half, you just have one blade, is it a scissor? I guess. I don't know. If you just have one half of a pair of pants, is it just pant? But again, those are few and far between, but those are probably the two most commonly occurring, that's where you're going to run into them, scissors and pants. Treat them as plural. And that's going to be have. I'm trying to think, what's some other singular nouns with plural? All right, the documentary leftward. So we're going to put in to argue, right? Got to change that. So the documentary leftward argues that left-handed people have greater risk of injury compared to right-handed people. Interesting. I'm left-handed, by the way, so I'm wondering if that explains my clumsiness from time to time. Argues, right? So that is a work of media, right, or art, whatever you want to say. And in this case, they make it easy because leftward is going to, it sounds singular to start with, but let's just say the documentary was called Left Words. That's also going to be singular. So argues that left-handed people have a greater risk of injury. I'm going to have to do a little research there, see what they found out. That's interesting. It is a right-handed world, though. I don't know if any of you all are left-handed, but for us lefties, you've come to find out it's a right-handed world. Okay, economics is the study of wealth creation and wealth transference. So do we need to change anything here? Economics, we mentioned, right? That's sort of like a academic discipline. It's an area of study, and those are treated as singular. And we have a singular verb. Our to be verb is. So there's not going to be any change here. Economics is the study of wealth creation and wealth transference. That is correct. Finally, our last one. And another to be verb. The class blank going on a field trip in September. I think my daughter's going to Washington, D.C. in September, October on a field trip. Anyway, class, collective noun, treated as a whole. That class is all going together. They're all moving together, one unit. So is be the correct answer. Class is going on a field trip in September. There we have it. Okay.
Thanks for working with me on this lesson. I hope you learned something new about verbs. Most of the time, it's easy to tell if the subject should have a singular verb or a plural one, but there are some special cases. Remember that collective nouns, like company or family, are singular. If you're not really talking about the group doing something together as one group, then it might be best to rewrite the sentence. Some nouns sound plural, but they're really singular, like news, physics, or measles. A few nouns that describe one object with two parts are plural, like scissors and pants. And even though some organization names or titles of books or movies sound plural, they're really singular, like the General Motors or the X-Files. I hope this lesson helps you. The more I learn about language, the more confident I am when I write and the more clearly I can communicate. I think you'll have the same experience the more you learn. Quick results to see how you did on the lesson.
Okay, so, wrapping up here, what you're going to encounter most, first off, are those collective nouns, right? That's what you're going to have to watch out for. So team, group, those things, making sure that you treat those as singular. Media, movies, television shows, titles are going to be singular. Those other specifics that will pop up from time to time. Professional sports teams in the United States, Cincinnati Bengals, Columbus Blue Jackets, Carolina Panthers, whatever, the Browns. Those are plural because we're talking about them sort of as individuals. It's a group of individuals there. And then those very rare occasions where we have those singular nouns that we treat as plural, like pants and scissors. So just to make sure, just watch out mostly for collective nouns and titles of works. That's where it's probably going to trip you up. And if you can keep that straight, you'll be fine. So any questions on these specific cases and special cases of verb-noun agreement? All righty. In that case, we'll stop here for the day and the week. We've got a weekend coming up here. So with no questions, we'll finish up here. And as always, I'll see you guys Monday at 12:15. Okay, y'all have a good weekend.